Hey, it's Plumber-Tom. Thank you for watching my videos. I wanted to let you know really quickly about some awesome resources that I have for you as you're trying to learn. I have free practice tests that you can take if you're preparing for a state test. I have preparation courses that you can take that will guide you through that process if you're getting ready for a test. I have other courses that can help you in learning the plumbing trade. So make sure to check out those resources. You can find a link in the comments below. When you participate in those courses, you're helping me to be able to create more content. So I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching. Hello, welcome to this presentation for the International Plumbing Code chapters 12, 13, and 14. My name is Thomas and we're gonna dig into these. You'll notice that today I am wearing a particular color. The color is gray. We're gonna look at gray water. We'll discuss what is gray water. And gray actually really fits into the whole green thing, you know, like saving resources. That's a rather big deal in society. So, gray is our topic for today. Let's get to it. International Plumbing Code chapters 12, 13, and 14 are kind of the lesser known chapters in the back of the book that we don't use very much. And that's because they're not enforced very much or even implemented in construction very much. So in this presentation, we're not going to go quite in as much of depth on these, but just get an overall understanding what's this about and how do these apply to plumbing. As we look at chapter 12, it's all about special piping and storage systems. And particularly, we're looking at things like med gas. 1201 gives us the scope, and it just says the provisions of this chapter shall govern the design and installation of piping and storage for non-flammable medical gas systems and non-medical oxygen systems, and all maintenance and operations of such systems are referred over to the International Fire Code. So here we have just a reference. Whenever you're looking for information on these, check out the Fire Code. 1202 focuses specifically on medical gases, and it refers us to the NFPA 99 code. It also mentions vacuum systems and says go check out the International Mechanical Code. So you see what they're doing here, right? They are saying that there are other codes, other standards that have already been established, and rather than going and like rewriting that or putting it into here, they're just like, go check it out over there, right? And in 1203, it talks about the design and installation of non-medical oxygen systems, and it refers us to the NFPA 51 and the NFPA 55. So those are the things that you would need to look at if you want more information. Now, med gas in and of itself requires extensive training. Well, you have to look at it this way. Plumbing is so regulated because it affects health and safety of people, right? Med gas is like that on steroids, because now we're dealing with the delivery of oxygen to someone's face, and if that is contaminated, it could be lethal. Med gas, therefore, is very highly regulated, and the installation of that, I've heard nightmare stories from those who've taken the training, who were told that med gas copper pipe, if it was not cleaned properly, or if there's flux in the system, can literally kill people. Like they run the oxygen through, it picks up those contaminants, and yeah. So you don't mess that up, right? You can't mess that up. It's too dangerous for people. And therefore, what am I saying? There's trainings for this, extensive trainings. If you want to improve your opportunities as a plumber or pipe fitter, maybe consider taking those trainings. That's not something we offer, but you go and take that, and that levels up your game. Obviously, the more trainings and certifications you get, the more valuable you are, and the more you could expect to get paid. So yeah, pursue that if that's of interest to you. Let's move on to chapter 13. This is all about non-potable water systems, also known as gray water. We'll look at the specific definitions of that in a minute, but let's just get an overview of this chapter. 1301 just goes over the general information. 1302 talks about on-site non-potable wastewater reuse. So that means there's some of this wastewater, we're going to reuse it for something, but that's within the building, right? So on-site. 1303, non-potable rainwater collection and distribution systems. Just going over the option of what if you could collect rain and use that for something. And 1304 gives more regulations on the reclaimed water systems. That's kind of the overview of the sections. We're going to hit on some of the specifics in those sections. But as I mentioned, we're not going to go through every single section in these chapters because we're just going to get the overall. Once you understand what's in here, you're going to be good. So let's talk for just a minute specifically on what is gray water. If we flip over to the chapter 2 definitions, and you ought to do that anytime you don't know a word, right? Or if it's like, maybe you know the word, but it's like, what does that really mean? What is that actually defining? It says waste discharged from lavatories, bathtubs, showers, clothes washers, and laundry trays. All of that is considered gray water. And you see what these have in common, right? Listen to this list again. Lavatories, bathtubs, showers, clothes washers, laundry trays. What do those have in common? All of them are mainly water and soap. I mean, that's about what you put down the drain on these, right? Sinks, and we're excluding kitchen sinks. It said lavatories. You wash your hands with soap and water. Washing machine. You wash your clothes with soap and water. Bathtubs and showers. You wash yourself with soap and water. You get the point. The only thing we're putting down the drain is soap and water. And therefore, that water is kind of like higher standard of wastewater than what comes out the toilet, right? And because of that, we can use it or reuse it possibly for other things without a lot of work like cleaning it. Now, definitely, we have the whole non-potable thing going on, right? Go to definitions on non-potable, and it means you're not supposed to drink it. It's not safe to drink. Obviously, this is not going to be used for anything potable. But there may be some uses for non-potable water, right? Like, it's a little dirty, but if I don't drink it, I might be able to use it. And that's what we're looking at right here. So what's the main idea behind all of this? Here's how I would summarize it. If water is so precious, and we ought to be conserving it, then why not reuse some of the wastewater if it does not cause any sanitary issues, right? Let's go reclaim some of it. Check out this diagram. This is an example of the on-site non-potable water reuse systems that are described in section 1302, okay? Take a look first off at the red lines. The red lines are the gray water. It's being collected from bathroom, sinks, showers, tubs, and a washing machine. Now, notice that these are representing actual piping systems. In between some of those bathrooms, you have the toilets. There is a separate drainage system for the toilets, not connected to the gray water, which is being diverted to a different location. That's the red, right? Yellow, you'll notice, is your normal sanitary drainage. So that means our toilets are connected. And down below, you'll notice the kitchen is connected because as we looked at the definition, you can't put a kitchen on the gray water system. It's got too much nasty food waste and grease and stuff that you don't want to get that in there, right? We're looking for relatively clean, soapy water, right? Now, let's not fool ourselves. Washing machines kick out lint and other stuff. And any of the showers or tubs are obviously going to have more than just soap and water. At a minimum, there's going to be hair in there, right? So some of that stuff is going to be in that gray water. That's where we come to the treatment system. That water is diverted into a tank, and that tank has a filter. So we filter off the lint, the hair, the junk, and now we're down to just soapy water. Now, if we want to bump that up in quality by a little bit, then we would also want to disinfect that water. And that can be done by the use of chlorine. Like even your typical swimming pool chlorine tablets or other treatments can be used in these systems to just clear off that bacteria. Now we have some water that we've strained it off, filtered it, right? We've treated it a little bit with some chlorine, and we can send it back into a supply for the toilets, right? Well, who cares if the water coming into the tank of a toilet isn't as clean as something I would actually drink? It's just going to flush the toilet. Well, and really, by the time I put chlorine in it, it's probably relatively safe, but it could be used for the toilets. So we send it up to the toilets with a separate supply from our potable water. Now, there are a few other connections to our treatment system, one being an overflow. What if the amount of water coming from our gray water system, lavatories, showers, washing machines, all of that, is more than we need for our toilets? Well, then we're going to have to overflow. So that overflows and dumps into our normal sanitary drains. Again, that's the yellow. So you see it come off, and we're just going to let it overflow. But what if there's a different scenario? What if the amount of water coming from all those gray water fixtures is not enough to flush my toilets? Then we're going to need to add some water. So we bring fresh water in. This is actual potable water, and it has to go through the backflow prevention. We're not going to allow this gray water junk to get sucked back into our potable. It goes through backflow prevention into the treatment system, and now we can supplement. You know, if there's not quite enough water happening in this, we can just bump that up and have enough for the toilets. Now, I'm going to point something out about all this. This system's pretty cool, right? I mean, like, you got this coming this way and that going that way, but what you have to observe is the fact that it's going to take more labor and more material. For the drains, you've got a whole separate system taking gray water over to the holding tank, and you have your regular sanitary collecting toilets and kitchen. Usually, you're going to save pipe and materials if you're just connecting fixtures close together where they're at, right? But now we've created a separate system, also requiring separate venting. So now we've got more vents. If I was going to do a bathroom group and save some venting, do a wet vent, well, now I've separated the toilets, so they have to have separate venting. And it gets more involved with piping. You can see that right away. Look at potable. Potable system is now going to have separate piping going to all the toilets. So normally I just run my cold water and branch off here and there and get her done. Now I've got another line running through the whole house just to go to the toilets. So you can see there on both the waste and the water side, we've got more labor, more materials happening to get this system in. Not to mention, the cost. If you're looking at cost, what's it going to take to put the treatment system in and to have that installed? I mean, there's more to these systems, right? And bottom line being, it can get expensive. All right, let's get into some code specifics, because we're not going to ignore the code altogether here. Just hitting on main points. And I'm going to just point out here too, I'm not going in sequential order. I'm going in kind of order of just topics, right? But these are all within chapter 13. So 1302.2, source of gray water. We've talked about this, but it specifically states lavatories, bathtubs, showers, clothes washers, and laundry trays. 1301.2.2 gives us the specifics for filtration. We talked about you bring the water in and you're going to filter that, get the hair and the lint out. That has to be a 100 micron filter or finer. And that the micron just refers to the size of holes that you're letting the water pass through and what will be collected as a result. So you got the 100 micron. 1301.2.1 gives us the specifics for disinfection. So now we're going to treat that water, put some chlorine in it. It says you need to do 4 parts per million of chloramines or free chlorine. And that just gives you your quantities as what to apply. The storage tank is specified in 1301.9, and there's some information about pumps and distribution in 1302.8 to 1302.11. So again, this is just within the code where some of those system components are explained. Let's have a look at 1302.2.1, prohibited sources. We've looked at what you can use for gray water. We should also be well aware of what should not be used, and the code spells that out, starting with the obvious, right? Wastewater containing fecal matter. Anything that has human waste in it, any wastewater, we're not going to use that, right? Let's just send that down the sanitary drain. Others, though, reverse osmosis water, water softening discharge water, kitchen sink wastewater, we talked about that with the grease and food waste, that's a no-go. And dishwashers are going to have the same kind of water. You know, you get the food and grease off of the dishes. And then finally, water from wet hooded scrubbers. That's more the commercial or industrial stuff. And most of these make a lot of sense, right? That you wouldn't want that water going into your gray water. For example, a water softener is going to have salt during parts of that regeneration cycle. It's going to push salt. Well, you know, having high content of salt maybe not that great for your fixtures either. Let's consider for a minute 1303, which goes over non-potable rainwater collection and distribution systems. Do you know the laws in Utah regarding the collection of rainwater? I mean, from a logical standpoint, it makes very much sense. If water's just falling off my roof and I'm generally in need of water, I can just collect that, right? It just kind of makes sense. But there are actually laws in Utah against the collection of rainwater, because what they want to have happen is all that storm water hits the ground, sinks down into the ground, into the aquifers, and then we can pull it back out and use it, right? If people are using a lot of surface water for things, that may deplete the aquifers, and it may also be more contaminated water. If you think about what is actually clean, the earth is an incredible filter. As water pushes down through all that sediment and then we pull it back out of a well, it's clean. It's clean, way cleaner than what you go look at a pond, go jump in a lake. I mean, there's bacteria in there, right? Not something you want to drink. Anyway, going back to what does Utah allow? This is the best I could find. I searched and searched. There is an organization online that has this law listed. It says Utah allows for the direct capture of storage of rainwater on land owned or leased by a person responsible for the collection. So they're saying you can do this, but there are some parameters. According to Senate Bill 32, back in 2010, a person registered with the Division of Water Resources may collect and store no more than 2,500 gallons of rainwater. That's your limit, is 2,500 gallons, which, I mean, that's a sizable tank, you know. You could do that. But the key here being that you would need to be registered with the Division of Water Resources. And in that process, I don't know what they allow or don't allow. If they'd be like, well, no, we're not going to let you do that. But the law here says that it's possible to do that. Now, are people going to register? Do people even know to register? If someone just looks on YouTube and sees how you collect rainwater from your roof and starts using it, well, I mean, it could happen. But it's good to, I think, be aware of, here's the law in Utah. 1304 talks about reclaimed water systems. And again, this is where you'd be reclaiming that water, that gray water, treating it, and then pushing it out for use on maybe a lot of things, right? This is specifically for gray water that may be collected and then pushed into a building from elsewhere. Now we're not just inside, but we're reclaiming it and sending it into a building. And that whole process may increase the pressure. Let's say our place of water collection or where we're treating it to send it to the building is higher up than the building. Now we may have an increase of pressure. And anytime there's higher pressure than 80 psi, we have to install pressure reducing valves. The same is with the potable, but that applies to these reclaimed water systems. Now there's a lot more in 1304 that I'm not going to go over. You're welcome to flip through there, and it's a good idea to be familiar with at least what the sections are talking about. But in general, that's what this section is about. You know, you're going to reclaim water somewhere, push it into a building, and then use it. All right, let's move on to International Plumbing Code Chapter 14. What's the difference? The difference here is that we're dealing with subsurface landscape irrigation systems. The idea as depicted here is that we're going to use that gray water, the same stuff that we talked about in Chapter 13, but now we're just going to turn it loose in our yard and let it water our plants. As mentioned, we have the same sources: lavatories, bathtubs, showers, clothes washers, and laundry trays. But in this case, when we're just sending it outside, Filtration may not really be necessary, right? I mean, little lint and hair or something goes in the dirt, who cares? Is it a good idea? Yeah, I mean, it might help keep your system clean, keep from clogging up your pipes if you filter it. So, it might be good, but it's not actually required in Chapter 14 to filter. Likewise, there's not a requirement for disinfection. We don't need to chlorinate this water on the way to the plants. In fact, that would probably be bad for them. So this is basically just send it out, right? Distribution piping, in this case, is going to be gravity flow. You can collect it in a reservoir. Say put a sump somewhere and then pump it out to the yard or particular places within the property. But generally, it's just a gravity flow system. You let that water go out. It's going to seep into landscape, gardens, flower beds, all that sort of stuff. Now, in 1402.1, they do give us an equation for how to calculate the amount of gray water. Because if you're going to size a system and try and figure, like, well, how much water is going to come out? How much is going to go to my yard? And if it's going out there, well, how do I distribute that? Where's too much? Anyway, you can figure this up by calculating gray water equals the occupants times the flow demands per person. And that's given in that 1402.1. Here's the flow demand per person. It says residential, you'd have 25 gallons per day per person for showers, bathtubs, and lavatories. And you would add 15 gallons per day per person for clothes washers and laundry trays. So basically, you're just going to count heads and be like, how many people are going to normally be in here? And I'm going to calculate according to that, add up my total gallons. Well, and then I have an idea of like, here's how much gray water is going to flow per day out to the yard. Now we have to look at the receiving end, and this chapter does talk about percolation, and percolation is referring to how fast water will seep into the ground. Different types of earth will absorb water at different rates. For example, sand is going to let that water go right through. Clay is going to hold it like a bowl, and you get a whole mix of dirts and earths in between there. So you kind of need to know the percolation rate. That would help you design the size of the system and what's going on. So percolation, again, is just the rate of absorption of water into the soil. This chapter of the code in 1402.2.1 requires that you test 3 different times to get a really good idea. And you would need to do an open test hole. So you open this, dig a hole in the ground that's 4 to 8 inches, and then you add gravel in the very bottom, put the water in, and see how fast that water is absorbed. When we go to dumping water into the earth around us, we have to start thinking about the possible negative impacts, given that this is actually wastewater, right? And it could impact some important things, like our water well. We wouldn't want to contaminate our water or our lakes and streams. So there are certain distances that we have to keep things from, things like buildings, lot lines, water wells. You see that on this table. And then you have minimum horizontal distances. If you're going to have a storage tank, they need to be a certain distance from those elements. And if you're going to have your irrigation disposal field, that's where you're just going to pipe it out and let the water seep into the ground. Those have to be a certain distance from those elements as well. Now, this is very similar to the drainage field that you'll see on the back end of a septic system. And it's basically the same idea, right? Septic's less about water my plants in my yard and more about just get that water into the ground. But from this perspective, where we're taking wastewater and dumping it into the ground, we're still going to use that caution and keep distance from things. Let's talk for a minute about the installation. This is all in 1403. And again, there's more detail than I'm going to hit here, but let's just talk about the basics. You're going to have an absorption area. That's where the water is taken into the ground. When you're excavating, the trench should be not less than 1 foot wide, but not greater than 5 feet wide. So you can see you're going to kind of dig this thing out and open it up. And most of the time that's going to be filled back in with some mulch or something that the water can pass through and feed the plants. Now, distribution piping, that's what we're going to bring it out there with, has to be at least 3 inches in diameter, not less than 8 inches below the surface. So we do actually trench these down into the ground and have a slope of or 4 inches per 100. We're talking about our typical, slope, 1/8 to 1/4 inch per foot. Here's a quick diagram we can look at. This is a little more complex than just running it through a pipe and letting it out in the yard. But this could also have some really great applications for irrigation, right? There's gray water coming from the house on the left, goes through a filter. Let's get the hair off on this system. Then it dumps into a reservoir. Once it's in the reservoir, we do have the option to dump that if it overflows into the sanitary drainage system. If we're getting too much water and the irrigation doesn't need that, we just dump it into the sanitary, right? But otherwise, we send it out. And in this one, there's a check valve, some control valves, and it breaks into like a manifold with separate irrigation zones. So I can turn these on and off. I can allow the water to go through. Now, mind you, this isn't going to be generally a pressurized system. I suppose you could, but you're just going to have valves that would be down in the ground that you could turn on and off and allow water to flow where it needs to. So that's your explanation for chapters 12, 13, and 14. I have a question here at the end for consideration. Why do you think we are not installing these systems all the time? I mean, isn't this a good idea? Wouldn't it be great if everyone starts doing this, reclaiming water, using it to irrigate? I hit on the reason for this earlier in this presentation. It has mainly to do with the cost, right? Whether you're doing a reclaim system inside to refill your toilets, or you're going to send that water out in the yard, you've got more pipe, you've got more labor, there's just so much more involved that unless you're one of those people who really wants to save the earth, and I'm not trying to criticize, I mean, that's cool. We need to do that, right? We got to be conservative. But unless you have a lot of money and you want to save the world, a lot of people are just going to say, I'll take the standard because the extra $10,000 to $20,000 is not worth it to me. Water's cheap compared to that. So here we are, right? Now, my opinion, if we continue to increase in population and our water needs are stretched, then government regulation is what would cause more of these systems to be installed, right? If the government were to legislate and say, yeah, everyone has to install these now, well, yeah, then we're going to start putting them in everywhere, right? But until that happens, it's going to be few and far between. The code tells us how to handle this situation, but generally that's why you and I, we don't install these. Maybe you have, but I just really don't see these very often, you know what I mean? So in conclusion of the whole thing here, the punchline I'm going to give is, hey, you can save water if you want to, and here's how you do it. All right, thanks for watching this presentation on International Plumbing Code chapters 12, 13, and 14. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding of the options available for gray water systems. And if people are talking about that around you, now you have a little better perspective of what that's all about. I'll see you next time.